about 100 people into a room about 1/10 the size of this one. Some people didn't get in, so we decided to move to Big Alaska. After 2 years, we tried a different configuration the second year. People were standing outside the door, and it just didn't work. So we finally got over to the Discovery, or the expedition room, and we packed that room, and people were standing out in the hall. So we thought, well, we got to do something different, because people were being turned away, and there weren't enough seats. So the Liberty was kind enough to let us come in here, and we're really grateful to them. I'd like to thank England Marine for actually picking up the tab on this, as we have to. Pass it on the line.
Hi, I'm Dave Densmore. I fished at Coldstream. I'm Pat Nixon. I fished Cooking for 20 years.
Hi, I'm Smitty Smith, and I fished for a number of years with a willow stick and grocery string line. Then I graduated to a little bit more sophistication. Anyway, I got a couple of stories for you, which, according to most of what I say, are entirely untrue.
It's true. I'm Susie Smith Johnson. This is my dad, and the girl community coming up here. Actually, my dad, starting when I was 15, but he taught me how to fish with a string and a hook for bullheads in the slough.
I'm Jay Speakman, and I'm the MC. But I'm also an ex-fisherman. I fished lobsters for 12 seasons in Maine, starting when I dropped out of college actually to do that, and worked my way up through it. And then I went to British Columbia and Alaska and fished herring, halibut, crab, and salmon. And I don't fish anymore, but I sure like to listen to the stories.
My name is Jim Tote, and I still fish some. I used to, but I'm a third-generation Columbia River gillnetter. I started running fishing bluebacks out of a skiff when I was in 8th grade. And when I was a junior in high school, I was running a full gillnet operation with a diver net. And started crewing in Alaska when I was 15, and when I was 21, I started running the same boat, and the same Kodiak every year, other than the oil spill year of '99, we didn't fish. And I'm going to pass the mic to an old friend of mine that I've seen, and probably for the first time now, in at least 15 years, 20 years. Ross was the executive secretary of our fishing union years back, and anyhow, he's a real pioneer in the Columbia River gillnet fishing. Here's Ross.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know about this microphone. Does everybody hear me? Yes. Because I can make you hear me without it if it doesn't. I started fishing 60 years ago in the river gillnetting. I did some trolling. I was the president of the West Coast Trollers in 1970. I represented the gillnetters from 72 through 75, and after that I pretty much retired, but maybe one of my stories will reveal why I retired.
Joe Benholm, started fishing back when last fisher became a state, 58 I believe. And got a few stories to tell. Hope the statute of limitations is not high. And a few of them on my fishing partner down there, a couple guys to my left. Anyway, I'm sure there'll be some entertainment here on some of these stories, but basically, we'll start off by begin with a little bit of the history of where it all started. So, back to you, Jay.
I got a short one here for you. I was tuna fishing off the Washington, Oregon coast, and I took my cousin Bob with me as a deckhand. He brought along another guy by the name of Bob. We had two Bobs on the boat. They immediately became known as Smart Bob and Dumb Bob. Anyway, they were pretty energetic young guys. They were really into sharks. They just loved to stay up all night, whittling the flesh off a shark's jaws. And that was something I needed my sleep. But anyway, we were catching quite a few tuna, and they were flopping around on deck, and there happened to be quite a bit of coagulated tuna blood on deck, which they started scooping up and putting in a bucket. By the time it was time to quit fishing, they had a whole 5-gallon bucket full of tuna blood, which they immediately started flinging over the side to attract sharks, which I think was a real bonanza for the sharks. They soon came around just garfing up these big gobs of tuna blood. But anyway, I went to bed. I couldn't stay up all night catching sharks and fish the next day, so I was laying in bed. Pretty soon I heard a screaming and yelling and a racket on deck. It got to be more insistent all the time. Finally, it got to the point where it wasn't just funny anymore. It got to be sort of a serious situation. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to get up and see what's going on out there. And I got up, and dumb Bob was had a hold of the tail of a shark, and he was clear over the rail. He was well, 2/3 of his body was in the water, and my cousin Bob had a hold of his legs, and he was draped over the rail. His elbows were in the water, and it looked a pretty serious situation to me. Luckily, the other sharks out there weren't sniffing around, but so I finally got a hold of my cousin Bob. I'm not saying whether he was Smart Bob or Dumb Bob. I managed to drag him over the rail back into the boat, and then the two of us got a hold of the other Bob, and we managed to extract him from the water. And next thing I knew, they were both out on deck, cutting the jaws out of these sharks that they'd already caught, and started whittling the meat off the shark's jaws. But that was a fairly lucky ending to what could have been a serious situation.
I learned how to clean fish on my grandfather's chop farm when I was 5. And then I went to work on my dad's fishing boat when I was 15. It was a charter boat out of Milwaukee. And he convinced me that I would be a good deckhand, and he would show me everything I needed to do. And he would pay me $3 a day. Well, I was thinking about that last night. I was thinking of what story I would want to tell. And I was thinking, that's probably about still what I'm making today after I pay taxes. So I don't know. Maybe I was really rich back then, didn't even know it. But he said, but you're going to make tips. And you can keep all the tips, and you can have all the salmon eggs, and you can sell the salmon eggs. So I was rolling in dough. This was back in 1965, and fishing was really good off the coast. And sometimes we would do 2 and 3 trips a day. So my hit was $3, $6, $9 a day. And we had, that was the Almar that we had. It was an old, what was that boat, Dad?
An LCPR was a military vessel, 40-foot double short boat. It was a personal rescue boat, had a 671 Detroit diesel in it, and we had converted it into a charter boat.
There. I never was too much into all that stuff. I just knew how to clean fish and haul fish and cook and clean and everything else. I did everything. I stayed on the radio all the time. But anyway, so I really liked my job. In fact, I liked it a lot, and I had the best boss. He was really a good guy to work for, and actually he was a much better boss to work for after we got rid of the charter boat and he had his own commercial boat. Working with the public is really hard, especially a bunch of drunk fishermen that would get on your charter boat. But I did all right with my making money there. They would pay me, they clean their fish, I got 25 cents a fish. They cleaned them through, and the limit was 3, so that was $1 a person. And we had 6 people, 2-3 trips a day. And I had this little a windbreaker with a cigarette pack holder thing in it. I would smoke then, but I would put all my tip money in there, and that thing would just be bulging at the end of the day. And it was, I don't know, I really had fun because I would make more money than the boy deckhands on the other boats. What a great job there was only one other girl that worked on her dad's boat. And there weren't very many girls working on boats in those days because I guess it was bad luck to have a girl on a boat. Remember those? Remember that? Yeah. So Jeanette was the other deckhand on her dad's boat, and me. And then there were some wives. So I guess if you were a wife, then it was okay to be on a boat. But other than that, there weren't too many girls. And the girls made more money fishing, getting tips than the boys, and they were always jealous. So that was kind of a fun memory. One other quick story from my fishing days in Alaska. How I came back. I joined the Navy, and I was stationed in Hawaii. And I came back, and I'd been laying on the beach in Hawaii for about 6 months after I got out of the Navy, and I was about as dark as this floor. And I came back. I needed a job. So Dad says, well, we're getting ready to go to Alaska. And now he had the sea miner that he built. And it was a really nice 47-foot trailer, and he built it, and it was real nice. And I said, okay. He said, well, your first job, you get down in the fish hole, and I got 800 silvers to glaze. Fishing was really good. Remember that, Dad? Remember putting me down there? And of course you know. Yeah, he did, really. So it's 10 degrees below 0 in the hole with the blast freezer blowing right out at you, and you're sticking these fish in this Provex stuff and stacking them up like cordwood. I was down there for probably, well, conservative, maybe a minute, and I thought I was going to die. I was frozen to death. I came up, and he's laughing. I come up out of the hole, and I mean, like, tears were streaming, and they were frozen on my face, and it was so cold. And he said, get back down there. He made me go back down there. And eventually, I got all the, that was drunk and having a great time and partying. I think that's what she really wanted to do. But she knew my dad, and she knew my dad's boat. And we had a nice boat with a head and a galley, and it, was warm. And my dad's a great fisherman, and we were always a Highlander boat. And he didn't take big chances and risks. We're still alive today because he's a good skipper. Well, I get up to, we were in Pelican, Dad and I was up drunk up in the Pelican Rosie's Bar and Grill, and I meet this Indian kid, Tommy. I don't remember the name of his boat. Do you? No? Okay, well, it was a little Indian boat, little double-ender. Then he fished around Pelican, didn't go too far out or anything. And he said he needed a deckhand. I said, well, my girlfriend Diane, she wants a job on a fishing boat. Well, get her up here. When can she get here? So I called Diane on the payphone. I said, when can you be here? She said, I'll be there Sunday. It was 2 days. Okay. He said he'd wait for her. Make a long story short, she gets up there, she flies up, she quits her job. I think she was bartending at a bar down in Long Beach, Washington. And she gets up to Alaska, and she flies up there, and she's drinking champagne, free champagne. They used to have free champagne on the planes. And she flew up there, and she was all drunk up. She gets in on the mail plane, and this guy, I don't even know how this happened. He remembered that she was coming in. He goes down to pick her up at the dock. And we were gone by then. Dad and I took off, so I was like, I didn't know if she got there or anything. So the next day, she calls on the radio. She got this guy to call us on the radio. And she was cussing me out. she gets to this guy, Tommy picks her up at the mail plane float, and she says, well, I really have to use the restroom. And he says, well, come on down to the boat, and he hands her a bucket. So she's telling me this on the radio, and she says, I thought it was going to be a boat like Smitty's. I said, well, I didn't have time to tell you. And the boat was filthy, and he was not a real nice person. He was okay when he was sober. But anyway, she stuck it out, and she fished 3 months with him. She cleaned that boat up, and she had an adventure she still talks about today. And she still talks to me. And we talked every once in a while. We used to fish out at the fair weather grounds, and they fished around down next to the shore a little bit more. And so I didn't talk to her on the radio very much, but she was there for 3 months, and we were coming back down, going to go back down to Seattle. And I got a hold of her on the radio and asked her if she wanted a ride back to Seattle, get her, if she was going to marry this guy or whatever happened, And she gets on the radio, she said, if I'd had my Jesus shoes, I would have walked home by now.
Closer? Is that good? Well, I started back in '58, and I'll just start with the first adventure I had in Chickney. I guess it was a Chickney, Alaska, yeah. I got lucky. I was born into a fishing family back in '44, and grew up around the fishing Puget Sound. This is before the whole decision, way before. That was a real lucrative area for the fishermen, purseaners for salmon. So they rip up their nets, and people had to get their nets fixed, and it was a little business that we had, a few of us young fellows around the dock. Anyway, we got pretty proficient at what we did. And so we would make, $30, $40 a day. Going year for these people, that was a heck of a lot of money. It's cool to do that. And, when people would rip up and have to have their nets mended. Well, years ago, and always looking, now we got to know who the highliners were and who they weren't and what boat you'd like to be on someday and all that. And you had to paint their houses, you had to mow their lawns and everything for the job. And you had to really show your stuff for nothing. And I mean, they were cheap. Anyway, finally got a job, and then finally got lucky and I was
I've been lucky that through my career I've met some pretty colorful people. One in particular that I'm going to talk about, his name is Snook Taylor. Anybody in the audience ever hear of Snook Taylor? I know some of the guys up here have, but he was from Longview, Washington. He was a gill netter, notorious seiner, good fisherman, practical joker. Anyhow, I'm going to go back to, I think it was 1963. I was just a young buck crewing for my dad. Anyhow, this one year, Snook needed a new cook. And there was a fella that lived in Longview. He hadn't been off the farm in the Dakotas for too long, but he was living in Longview and wanted a job. And by golly, Snook hired him on. Now, Art Nicholson knew that Snook Taylor was a heck of a good fisherman. Snook knew that Art was a good worker. Art didn't know that Snook spent more time figuring out practical jokes to pull on his crew than what he did trying to figure out how to catch fish. Anyhow, going on with the story here, later on, probably in June sometime, all the captains and crews flew to Alaska. The place in particular where we were going is Larson Bay. It's a village of about 80 people in the wintertime. And in the summertime, population swells to a couple hundred because there's a salmon cannery there. It was owned by Alaska Packers. Anyhow, we get into Larson Bay this first day, and I'm young, but my father had instructed me, don't bite on anything that sounds out of the ordinary. Just don't pay attention. Anyhow, so we get into Larson Bay the first day, and everybody's just kind of laying around because our boats are still in dry dock. They're not gonna launch until tomorrow. So anyhow, Art being the greenhorn and wanting to strut his stuff and show off to everybody what he's made of, he goes to Snook and says, "Hey Snook, I'm going to be cooking. What kind of fuel do we use in the stove?" Without hesitating, Snook said, "Wood." And Snook took his hand and he panned the high tide line, strewn with driftwood. Art had a job now. Art rolls his sleeves up and he starts hauling driftwood. By that night, he had a pile that would fill a 10-yard dump truck. And he was proud. And everybody in camp that was watching Art admired Art and his wood pile. Anyhow, the next day, they splashed the boats. And it's Art's first time to visit the Terry Ray. Terry Ray was Snook Taylor's boat. And it was a pretty new boat. It was only a couple, 3 years old. And Art got aboard and told Snook, "My God, this is a nice boat indeed." Then he goes in the cabin to inspect the stove that he's going to be cooking on all summer. And, well, that's the first time that Art was introduced to Snook Taylor's practical jokes. See, at that time, all boats used diesel stoves. And everybody in camp knew that fact. So we all had a pretty good laugh on Art Nicholson. And so Art was sent to the stockroom 2 or 3 times a day to fetch things for the boat, such as prop wash, rudder fluid, God knows what stuff. But anyhow, Art was a good sport, and he took it all in. And anyhow, after a few days, we make it out fishing. And Art fell into a routine. Snook let up on Art a little bit, and Art let up his guard. And some time went by, and sometime mid-season, Art's wristwatch quit working. And Snook, being the nice man that he is, got his own personal wind-up clock, one of those big ones like this, and mounted it in the galley such that Art could see it from his bunk. Plus, he could see it from the galley. Art was proud. He's too proud to go asking somebody what time it was, so now he's got his clock. Well, now, every day or two, Snook would take it upon himself to spin the hour hand a couple of times, one way or the other. Poor Art went the rest of the season never knowing what time it was. It's in, I think it was in Ugac Bay or something. Glassy, calm, all rafted up. There was Terry Ray on one side, Joyce L in the middle, and I think we were anchored or tied up on the far side. All three boats rafted up. My dad wakes up in the middle of the night. He's got to take a pee, so he goes out on deck to relieve himself. And there's a strong smell of fresh perk coffee coming from the Terry Ray. So my father finishes his job and he walks over to the Terry Ray and sticks his head in the galley door. And he says, "Jesus Christ, Art! It's not even midnight. What the hell are you doing?" Art says, "Snook wanted breakfast at 5:30. Alarm clock says it's 5:30, breakfast ready, and they won't get their lazy butts out of bed." Anyhow, that season wound down, and we're all back down at Larson Bay. Season's over, everybody's in a hurry to go home, so we're tied to the dock at Larson Bay. And it's high tide, that's prime time to unload your purse seine. So Terry Ray's getting ready to unload the net. Snook says, "Art, I want you to go up by the stock room and bring me a pallet board down here that we stacked the net on." Art looks right at Snook and he says, "Not this time, Snooker. I'm not falling for the old pallet board trick."
I've been trying to figure out, I've got stories, you guys tell the stories now, I've got about 8, I want to say. I don't know which one to grab. I think I'll go with what I started thinking about was a friend of mine who fished Cook Inlet, is certainly an old timer, more important. And I didn't realize in the years I fished with him at Columbia Ward's Cannery that Maury was actually the first guy to throw a drift net into Cook Inlet back in the 50s. He had been running a grocery run from Anchorage down to Seldovia, and before he got into fishing, and he saw, as he make the run down there on his boat, he saw fish jumping in Cook Inlet. All the fishing at that point in time was around Cordova area, Kodiak, and all that. Nobody thought to come into Cook Inlet yet, and except for the guys who were set netting and the fish traps used to catch them along shore, but nobody threw any drift nets in there. And Maury went out with a friend of his in a skiff and one shackle of gear, threw out a net one year, didn't catch any fish, but saw a lot of fish, and they told somebody, and somebody told somebody else, and the very next summer he figured that there were 1,000 boats in Cook Inlet, all drifting. So, Maury told me a story. I wanted to tell sea stories and write them down years ago, and I started writing them, and one of the first things I wanted to do was try and let somebody know what the Cook Inlet salmon drift fishery was all about, where it had come from, and that kind of thing. And so I started looking for the history of it. I started trying to go into the local library and going anywhere I could. We didn't have the internet back then. But I couldn't find any history written down of the Cook Inlet salmon drift fishery. And so when I went back to school a few years later, several years later, and was given the option about what to study for my master's thesis, I decided I wanted to write that history. And they agreed to let me do that. And so I went and tried to collect an oral history of the guys who were up there at the very beginning and find out where it all came from, how it all started. And Maury was one of the guys who I interviewed and told me this, what I just related. I also found that when you ask somebody who's an old crusty fisherman, especially Norwegians, okay, and their standard answer is, "Well, I don't have anything to tell you." But there was this one time. And 4 hours later, I'm running out of tape and batteries and can you hold on? Can I come back tomorrow? And that's kind of what happened. And I ended up with this catalog that I'm still working on of these stories. And Maury tells a story that of fishing Copper River when he was to go out in the morning. It was back in the days before we had any type of a safety valve involved in our hydraulics. In fact, he didn't have hydraulics yet, what he called power takeoff, which was basically a fan belt in a salmon boat. For those of you who don't know, there's a reel, and the net sits on a reel, and you throw the net, you days this story takes place, they didn't have that. What they had was a reel powered by fan belt, which had an on-off. It was an on-off switch located in the stern, away from where the net might grab it. But it was also away from where you might be able to grab it if you got in trouble. Maury had been working in the back deck the night before, and his deckhand didn't show up that morning to go fishing, and so he ends up going out by himself. And so basically it was toward the end of the season, and he took off, and he made his first set, and he was about ready to pick it up. And the weather was not rough. There was nothing unusual. He was just going to pick up the gear. There was a bit of wind, and so he went in the back, and he was putting on his jacket, but hadn't snapped it up yet. And he saw the wrench laying on the deck from where he left it the night before. And at this point, he's standing in the back deck, and he's turned on the reel, and the reel's bringing in the lead line, the line from the reel to the net in the water, which sometimes is 30, 40, 50 feet long. And so he's doing that, and he leans down to get the wrench, and a gust of wind blows his jacket underneath right between the rope and the line coming on the reel and the reel itself. And the next thing he knows, he's being pulled backwards. He's got both arms in the coat, he can't get out, and he flips over backwards, the reel takes him. The line wraps around his chest, and he goes flying over and lands hard, and he's stunned. He doesn't quite know, what's going on. He knows what's going on, but he's still is shocked about what's happening to him. And there's no way he can reach. He tries to reach as he goes by. Tries to reach the on-off switch, and he can't do it. And it takes him around again. And you can imagine the kind of forces that's being applied to his chest. And he said basically what he did is the only thing he could think of to do is it was the second time he hit, he heard a noise. And what it was the fan belt squealing on that power takeoff that was powering the reel, making it turn. And it hit just somewhere in the back of his head. He heard that. And then took him around, and then it lifted him back up again. And the only thing he could think was that the only way he was going to live through this was to be able to stop that fan belt, to burn those fan belts out. He had one arm and one leg free. And when he hit the third time, he fought the turn and just tried to hold the deck. He was down on the deck, and he was trying to take him. And he heard the fan belt squeal and squeal and squeal, and finally the pressure eased and stopped trying to turn. And the fan belts continued to squeal, but they didn't have the force they had before. And he did not remember how he got out from underneath those lines. He said, I had a knife on my belt, and I don't know, I can't tell you how but he knew as soon as he got out from under it that he was hurt. And he had a crack in the ribs, but he was bruised real badly. And he knew he was only going to get worse, and he was alone. And so he said, he just basically, finished picking up the gear and did that, got it back on board, and then he turned the boat toward Kenai, not Cordova, where his deckhand was. Said, I never saw that son of a bitch again. And he went through it. And that's more important.
Let's see. We were, I had been just cruising around the South Pacific. I still had all the commercial gear on the boat. And all of a sudden, my wife, we had been checking into a ham radio net. They had a roll call, whatever we call it, and get the position and whatnot. We've long since given that up. We tune into it once in a while just to see what was going on. And my wife happened to hear my call sign on the radio. So I called back, and I had the guy switch over to another frequency. We were, the net was on a 20-meter band, and I had to switch over to the 80-meter band. We wouldn't interfere with the net. And Paul was a good friend of ours. He had a 70-foot Sparkman Stevens sailing schooner. He told me, he says, I hope you can come and rescue us. He says, he gave me the position. He says, we're anchored in South Bologna Reef. He said, what happened, he said the boat got hit by a freak wave. He said, the only thing I could think of to could do was hang on to the shroud lines. He says it went up and up and up, and he says it would come down. He says I was hanging straight over the side. The boat shut down pretty hard, and the bilge alarm went off, and you could immediately tell the boat was filling up with water. He said he put on his fins and a snorkel and went over the side and looked at the boat, and you could see that the mast had been driven down into it, pulled the keel down, pulled the chain brace loose on the shrouds. There was no way the boat could be salvaged. So they head for the nearest place. They knew it was actually an atoll. It was a sunken reef. He told me he had 3 pumps going, and he thought he could probably keep from sinking, but he'd sure appreciate it if I could come and rescue him and his wife and take some of the stuff off the boat. There's been a freighter already dispatched to pick them up, but they could only take he and his wife aboard. They couldn't salvage any of his gear. He had everything on board. So we immediately took a look at the chart. We estimated we were 90 hours from South Columbian Reef, but we headed for it anyway. We had to get him off of there. We hated to see them lose their boat, but he'd already resigned to that fact. So we started for South Columbian Reef. And in order to get there, we had to go through a whole maze of islands that were surrounding New Caledonia. And we got going. All of a sudden, we ran the boat up on a reef. We found out the sad fact that there were no navigational aids between us and the ocean. But we found that some of the markers were in the wrong place. And it wasn't really a marked channel. It was just a haphazard path through a bunch of islands and sunken reefs. So we calculated that we'd sure like to get out of this atoll in daylight. It's getting pretty close. So all of a sudden, the boat went aground. The only way we could get it off, in reverse, we couldn't pull ourselves off. The only way to get across was to take the anchor out in the dinghy. We had a 180-pound 4-fingered anchor, which we put in the dinghy, and then paid out some of the sheet lines, and I rode the dinghy out off to the stern. And then we put a line on the winch and started cranking. Luckily, the keel let go and we came off the reef. But the problem was then that we lost about a half an hour, and we're not going to be able to make it to the only place, hole in this sunken atoll that looked like it was a place where we could get out to the ocean. And by the time we were getting there, it was going to be dark. But we had no choice. We had to get our friends off their sinking sailboat. So we headed for this spot. When we got there, the wind had come up to about 30 knots. But that wasn't all bad news because it created enough of a swell inside the reef that showed up on the radar. We could see the breaks in this open spot in the atoll. So figured, well, we're going to have to go across, but there was no marks on the chart or anything to show how much water was in this open spot in the atoll. But we had no choice. So we got to the point where we could see the break in the atoll on the radar pretty plainly. and we had 90 feet of water. So we figured, well, we just have to head for the open spot, hope we can get over. So the further we got, closer we got to the open spot in the atoll, the shallower the water got. Got up to 60, 40, 30, 20. It was getting pretty dicey. I figured, well, just close our eyes and go for it. Which we did. With one eye on the reef and one eye on the fathometer. We got up to 10 feet. We took a deep breath. Went up to 12, 30, 40, 50, 60, and bam, we were out in the ocean. And we managed to get to our friends. We spent half a day transporting the stuff they wanted to salvage, putting it in our fish hold. Put them aboard. We took off. We got them into Bundaberg, Australia, and Queensland. They were happy. We were happy. And that's the end of that story.
The poem's about a boat that I lost, but short time after that I got another boat and it wouldn't float, and then I got another boat and
That's bad.
made it a season with it. We didn't have a stove, we ate sandwiches, we slept on our reindeer. It didn't have a ladder to the flag bridge, but that was my boat the first year. We're down in a place called Alatac Bay, in a small part of it called Dead Man Bay. It's about the 15th, 18th of August. It's the tail end of the salmon run. Most all of the boats have quit, but we're still trying to salvage part of a bad year. And there's about a dozen of us. We're taking turns on the west side deadline of Dead Man Bay for backouts. There was a pretty good chunk of fish that was up in closed waters, and a few of them would back out every day. And one or two boats would get a good set, the rest of them didn't get nothing. But only one shot a day is all you're going to get, because there's too many boats. As luck would have it, this one day, our set was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and put our net out, here come the fish. And we got the best set of the day. It made us happy. And got our fish aboard and got unloaded before noon, and knew we wasted our time going back and getting in line. So we said, we'll just go up the bay and go up a ways, look at the fish, and anchor up. Well, we went up a couple miles, and there was a tent on the beach. And so we anchored up, just a little ways up in this tent. Jumpers everywhere. I mean, jumpers everywhere. Now, I knew that the tent on the beach was fishing game. And I figured that these two guys I could see on the beach, there's bears running around the beach. There's a creek right there, and there's bears in the creek. I say, hey, why don't you guys come out and have a cup of coffee? They jumped in their Zodiac, paddled out. They're in no time. So they're happy to be on the boat, and we were making small talk and had lunch, and they even invited themselves if they couldn't bunk out on our galley floor for the night. I said, sure, but I had ulterior motives. I says, they were just young guys, and God, I know that working for Fish and Game, they weren't making much at all. So I said, I says, all these fish here, you know that there's more fish here than what this little creek could possibly need. He said, if you let us make a set here, we'd be doing Mother Nature a favor. And not only that, we'll cut you in for a piece of the action. Well, I was prepared to be disappointed, but they talked it over, and wouldn't you guess, they agreed on one condition. We could do it that night. It had to be pitch dark, in the middle of the dark, black, and there couldn't be any other boats around. So that was great. We were all happy. Jesus, we were really excited until I looked over and saw that there was a boat that just anchored about a quarter mile away from us. Damn. I had a plan. intruder. And this is in the afternoon, now probably 5 o'clock or something like that, cocktail time. And he says, hey, would you like to have a drink? And I says, sure. So I climbed aboard and they poured me a drink, and that was good. And boy, they're whining and dining me, and pretty soon we had another one. And then they began to lay on me the same story that I just already made a deal with the 2 real crick guards over in my boat. So I can't screw this up, I mean, I got to make this whole thing work. So I said, you know, I'm sure we can work something out, you know, but probably tomorrow night. Now, we need a few more fish to get up this creek before I'll let you go. But, you know, you guys are anchored awful close to this stream here, and I think you're probably scaring some of these fish, and maybe if you move across the bay, they're more liable to go up the creek tonight, so then tomorrow night we can pull off your plan. So, yeah, they said, great. So, anyhow, I go out and climb the Zodiac, and I get ready to leave, and I said, oh, by the way, you know, it's pretty damn cold on the beach, and we don't have anything to drink. And they reached in the gallon and pulled out a brand new jug of Jack Daniels and threw it to them. So I start paddling back over to my boat as these guys pick their anchor and they're heading 3 miles across the bay. I pull up to our boat and the crew's all standing out on deck wondering what the hell's going on, and I throw them the jug of Jack Daniels. They ain't seen whiskey all year. I mean, that's the first drop of booze has been on the boat, so they're all happy. And so now I've got to come up with a plan. How are we going to do this? So anyhow, we wait until it gets dark. Midnight. There's no moon. And Dead Man Bay's got big steep hillsides. On the 20th of August, it gets purple black. I mean, it gets real black. So we pick our anchor. And we start cruising slowly along the beach. And the hillsides that I knew were only like a quarter mile away looked like I could reach out and touch them. Or maybe they were 3 miles away. I couldn't tell. It's black. But we were parallel on the beach. Right where the fish were a few hours ago, nothing. Finally, I hear a couple splashes. So I ordered you guys to turn the skiff loose, and I start setting my net in a circle. Then I get about 50 fathom of net out, and I look back, I can't see my skiff. I can't see the beach. Am I setting in a circle? Is my circle too big? Is it too small? Am I in a straight line? Anyhow, I keep it going, and pretty soon, all my net's out. No skiff. I have no idea how configuration my net is, so we shut the engine off. We can hear the skiff engine. So it wasn't much longer. We got our ends together, and got our net first up, and we rolled aboard 50 of the blackest humpies I've ever caught. Next morning at daylight, we left, and the 2 boys from fishing came off on the beach, and we called it a season and went back to Larson Bay.
Because I didn't think anybody would believe a car salesman's stories. I had a charter boat from 46 to 53, and I had customers from all over the United States, and I had 2 guys from Connecticut. And when they showed up at the boat, I says, we shouldn't go out at all today because it's going to really be stormy and real rough. But they talked me into it. I don't know why I let them. Anyway, we got from the south shore of Columbia to the north shore, and we had some time getting there, but I couldn't convince them we should turn around and go home. All the gill netters were tied up there. And I asked him, I says, when are we going to be able to get out of here? Maybe 3-4 hours, because it was really violent. Anyway, I used to follow the crest of the ferry back to the ferry or to the south side of the Columbia. Anyway, we got on a crest foolishly, then we lost that, and boy, man, it was really rough. And I couldn't figure out how I was going to get into the mooring basin or the yacht club. And the boat was just standing up on big rollers, and told those guys to really hang on. Well, about that time, here goes something past my head, and it was a hatch cover off the front of the boat. Just barely missed me. I don't know where they would have been if I hadn't been able to keep going. Anyway, so the boat would fill up with water, and it was kind of open in the back, and I throttled it enough. I know the water went over the back side. And next thing I thought, what the heck is that? Big crashing sound. Well, it had a big battery in it, and it had come loose from the timbers, and it was hitting the engine on one side, and then the hull on the other side. And we had about 3 more big waves to get through, and somehow we made it. We made it over the yacht. My friend over there said, "Gee, what's the matter with you? What happened to you?" And I told him about the big scare. Anyway, so I done lots of fishing other than that. And my cousin called me and he says, "Why don't you come over here and I just bought a big 2-story log house and had some real good times." So I did. And I went upstairs and I was waiting for him, and I looked out the window and I seen the beginning of a trail. I thought, well, maybe I got time, I'll go see where that trail goes. So here's what happened. So it was on a walk. I wondered as I walked the path, as if it were all mine, that if the sun and the moon would forever shine. Why am I here? Is it because nature to me is so dear? Suddenly I hesitated and listened to a bird sing its song. And then again I walked along. And there was the river, forever a giver. A sandy beach would soon appear on the shore of the river so near. Why am I here? Will it ever become clear? The waves on the river made by the wind made a pleasant sound which would soon be heard all around. And then the rustling sound high in the trees of the white birch green leaves. Why am I here? Could it be that the sounds I was meant to hear? Where are the clouds, I wondered aloud. And there I noticed were the swans high in the bright blue sky as they flew effortlessly by. And then again, could the clouds be waiting till the midsummer sun shines its fullest so bright and makes it so light for us all at night? Why am I here? Is it that I might see the sun and the moon forever so clear?
When I first started fishing, I decided I wanted, being green, I didn't really realize the value of having an experienced deckhand. And so I hired one of my friends who was in the teaching field, and we took him out in 82, I think. It was one of the, or no, it was 1980. It was one of the roughest years in Cook Inlet. I talked to the guy I first deckhanded for, and he said he knew it to be the roughest in 25 years. Every day we went out, we fought bad weather, and out of the 12 periods we fished, we broke down 8 times. And so one day he came out of the cabin, I'd given him the wheel and said, "You take the wheel, I'm going to go out back and take a lead." And we were in 3 or 4 foot seas, and all of a sudden the boat starts going in a circle, and so I'm peeing in a circle, and I'm wondering, what in the world am I doing? And I get done, and I turn around, and I look, and he's standing in the doorway with the wheel in his hands. He said, "I don't think this is what you meant." I felt like I was in a Three Stooges cartoon. But anyway, so happened was that my buddy of mine had a deckhand, actually had two deckhands. One was his girlfriend, and the other guy who had been fishing as a crew for several years, almost a dozen years by then, was kind of the third person out. So I asked him if he'd be willing to jump on my board with my boat and take my deckhand's place, because I knew he was going to stick the season out, but I knew he was terrified, and so he still talks about it with fear. And he did. And so all of a sudden I have this experienced deckhand on the board, and he's got way more experience than I do, and he teaches me how to use the diesel stove to warm the cabin and stuff like that. And I was like, really? You can make this place comfortable. And so we head out of the river one day, and we had, what happened was is that we made a set that I was still new to Cook Inlet and didn't realize that the middle rip would actually suck a boat's net and boat and everything into it if you were on the wrong side. And I didn't realize the power it had until this particular day. And the middle rip at Cook Inlet, when it's really cooking, it collects a lot of trash. So we set off on that, no, not quite a net length off of the stick rip on the wrong side, the side it's sucking from. And you know, I figured my boat could tow fairly well, and so we're going to try and hold the tow, and we do fine. But the guy who and I at that point, we didn't know how to hang nets. We just purchased nets from a guy that did hang nets, and he was under the impression that you never wanted to take if the cork line was too short, you had to lengthen it. You didn't want to do it with a knot because the web would tangle on it. So what he would do was butt wrap them. He'd put them two together like that, wrap them in twine, wrap them in black tape, call it good. Most of the time that, I guess, worked for him. But then on this particular day, what happened was as I started picking the gear, we started picking up fish. We picked about a quarter of a shackle, got a bunch of fish on, and we picked those fish out. And by the time when we look, by the time that we've been taking that short time to do that, the buoy is already in the sticks, and because we're being sucked into the rip. So I put it in gear to tow it. And it just so happened that when we did that little bit of picking, we brought that butt splice right up off the reel, not off the stern of the boat. So all the pressure for towing was on it. And it parted. It parted in a matter of seconds, and all of a sudden there's this pop like I'd never heard before, and didn't really understand what was going on until I heard this, which was the web tearing, and then another pop when the lead line went. And the boat lurches forward. We both kind of stagger, and I put it in gear, and we're both yelling and going, "Oh my God!" And he goes, "Run to the other end. Let's go to the other end." Okay, so we run to the other end. We get to the other end and discover that our net is wrapped around thousands of sticks, 2 trees, and it's not only doing that, the rip is boiling so much that it's corkscrewing the net around the trees and all the sticks. And my deckhand, Danny was his name, looks at me and says, "I've seen worse. We'll get it back." So let's pick up that buoy, and I'm going, it's a wood boat, but we're going to be right next to these trees. And he goes, "It's all right, we'll get it back." So we go in, and we get the net back on board, and we kick about 2 or 3 feet. And there's this great big log that's been cut, so it's like a battering ram, and it's sloshing in the rip, and it's like just off the end of the boat. I'm going, "Danny," and he goes, "Well, let's see if we can spin it, So we're trying to then spin the, and it's not happening. And he goes, "I don't think I have seen it worse than this." And I went, "Yeah, I kind of thought maybe that might be the case." And so we ended up cutting the line, and there wasn't anything we could do. We had to leave the net there, and so I head back into the river. We're not too far out of the river, so I figured we could just barely make it in before the tide's too low. And so I get on the VHF marine radio, and I call Veronica, my wife, and I tell her she's got to go down to the cannery, get the truck, go find one of our friends who can help and who knows the canneries, and so I give her a couple suggestions. Go up to the gear shed, get another 3 shackles of gear, bring it down, and we'll put it back on. And so she does all that. And by the time I get in the river and pull up to the dock, she's there. Danny's got what little web we had left on board in a bag. we throw the bags, we put the bags down into the boat, and we decide we can still make it out of the river, so we're just gonna run, we'll set the gear out of the bags, which we do. We get out of the river, the fleet is now way down south, there's nobody in sight, and you kind of faintly hear them on the radio, which just kind of amplifies the fact that you really screwed up that day, and you feel really, really lonely and bad, and oh God. And so there's this likely looking streak to set the gear out, and there's not a stick in sight. So let's set here. So we'll set out of the bank to put the shackles together.